Welcome as we once again take a trip back in time to look at an iconic video game, and today we are looking at the NES classic Duck Hunt and its sniggering dog. At first you may think, is Duck Hunt really an iconic game? It was pretty much a one and done, and it is not exactly the deepest video game, even when compared to just other light gun shooters. However, the story of Duck Hunt, how it came to be, the people involved, and the legacy that is left behind may very well surprise you. So join us as we take a trip back to the 1970s, stop off in the 80s, and even jump into the Mushroom Kingdom as we look at the story of Duck Hunt. We want to say thanks very much for joining us today. Be sure to check out our other videos that look at other iconic video games such as Sonic the Hedgehog, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Metal Gear Solid, and many more. We would also love it if you could give the video a like if you enjoy what you see here today. Okay, enough of that. Let's lock and load our NES Zappers and look back at the history of Duck Hunt. The Nintendo of the 1970s was very different from what it would become in the 80s. With a focus on toys and arcade entertainment, Nintendo was interested in the electromechanical gun shooting games that were popular in arcades during this time. These would often be elaborate games that took up a large amount of space, and for a time, they were very popular, but due to all the physical parts that made up these games, they were also very expensive. Nintendo's laser clay shooting system was popular, but its size and expanse made it less than ideal. However, a meeting between Nintendo legends Gunpei Yokoi and a man called Masayuki Uemura, who at the time worked for electronics giant Sharp, caused a chain of events that were a key part of saving the USA from the video game crash of 1983. But before we get to the NES in the 80s, we have to stick around the 70s for just a little while longer. While working for Sharp, Masayuki Uemura was meeting with Gunpei Yokoi to discuss Sharp's photoconductive cells, which were what was used for these older electromechanical shooting games. This got the creative gears of Gunpei Yokoi spinning, and he hired Uemura away from Sharp to come and work for Nintendo. It was here that they came up with the idea of the Nintendo Beam Gun toys. There were a few different variations of this product, but they mostly revolved around using the photoconductive cells and light to use a light gun to shoot at an object. Nintendo offered two different types of guns, a revolver style and a rifle style, as well as several different targets that could be used with them. There were special packs available that would combine a specific target with a gun, and that brings us full circle to Duck Hunt, but not the Duck Hunt you know and love from the NES. In 1976, Nintendo released its Duck Hunt light gun game for the people in Japan. This came with a light gun rifle and a small projector, both of which required batteries to run. The projector would randomly project a duck onto the wall that would try to fly away, and the player would have to shoot it. This was actually way more accurate than you would expect, and this and the other range of Nintendo beam gun toys that were released in the 1970s were very popular, with many reports saying that Nintendo shifted well over 1 million of these before they shifted focus to video games. Many Nintendo collectors would love to have one of these in their collections. Let us know if you have one or have ever seen one. Really, the Nintendo Famicom, which would later become the Nintendo Entertainment System in the USA and the rest of the world, needs no introduction. In many ways, the Famicom and the NES are responsible for the video game industry that we have today. In 1984, the NES was very popular in Japan, and Nintendo had lots of plans for add-ons and accessories for the system, one of which was a light gun that would use a very similar technology to the Nintendo Beam Gun toys that were popular in the 70s. The light gun that the Nintendo Famicom got in 1984 was very different from the NES Zapper that the West got. In Japan, it was made to look like a real revolver, and players could even fan the hammer if they wanted to look like a real skilled marksman. As well as looking completely different, the NES Zapper in Japan also had a different name, known as the Nintendo Beam Gun. The way that the Nintendo Beam Gun plugged into the system was also different. In Japan, the Famicom had two controllers hardwired into the system, but on the front there was a 15-pin jack, and this was what the Nintendo Beam Gun used to connect to the Famicom. Duck Hunt along with the Nintendo Beam Gun were released in Japan in 1984, and they were quite popular. However, Duck Hunt would really become iconic just a year later. Okay, we need to know, what do you think is cooler? the Nintendo Beam Gun for the Famicom, or the Nintendo Zapper for the NES? Be sure to let us know in the comments section down below. Now, you may think that we are going to jump into how Duck Hunt, along with the NES Zapper, was a key part of Nintendo revitalizing the home video game console market in the USA in 1995. But before we get to the regional initial launch of the NES in 1985, Nintendo had a treat in store for arcade gamers. Before the Nintendo Entertainment System was released in 1985, gamers were able to sample what the upcoming NES would have to offer thanks to the Nintendo vs. Arcade system. This offered arcade conversions of several key Famicom and what would become NES games: Balloon Fight, Urban Champion, Excite Bike, and Ice Climber, to name a few. However, Duck Hunt would also be made available on the Nintendo vs. Arcade system, making it something recognizable when the NES would be released late in 1985 as a test launch in New York before the system would be rolled out in California in early 1986, and then the rest of the country by the time Santa Claus was getting ready to be sliding down people's chimneys for the holiday season of 1986. The Nintendo Entertainment System is one of the most iconic video game systems of all time, and it truly did turn the tide for the home console market in the USA. However, Nintendo and retailers were a little nervous about having another video game system to try to sell to the public. This is why the NES was marketed as more than just something that could play video games. In many ways, the NES was marketed just like many of the popular toys of the day, such as Transformers, G.I. Joe, and more. The Famicom got a complete redesign, looking more like a VHS player, and the cartridges themselves were also redesigned to be much larger and look different from what systems such as the Atari 2600 and the ColecoVision before it offered. However, it was the two included accessories with the initial Nintendo Deluxe set that really made the NES seem like more than just another video game console. The Nintendo Deluxe set famously comes with Rob the Robot, along with the game Gyromite, which players can use Rob to play. Also included with this set was the NES Zapper and the game Duck Hunt. Nintendo had so much faith in Duck Hunt that it was picked to be one of the two included games that gamers would first experience with their NES. Including a light gun and an arcade-style game to go with it was a genius move by Nintendo. Duck Hunt would be included in the most iconic of all the Nintendo Entertainment sets, the Nintendo Action Set, which was by far the most popular version of the system. This version ditched Rob the Robot, but it came with two controllers, the NES Zapper, and a cartridge that contained two games, Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. This set was widely released in 1988 and was a massive hit throughout the year, especially during the holiday season. When most people think of a boxed NES console, it is the NES Action Set that comes to mind. Still, Nintendo was not done packing in Duck Hunt with the NES system just yet. After this, Nintendo would release the Nintendo Power Set. This came with two controllers and the NES Zapper, but there was also the NES Power Pad floor mat controller, which was used for the game World Class Track Meet. This saw that iconic double cartridge of Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt increased to a triple cartridge as World Class Track Meet was now added. While this set can be found, it is less common than the Action Set, but most collectors, if they are going to have just one NES system on display, it will be the Action Set that they want. Which version of the NES did you have? We would love to hear your story about it in the comments section. So we have looked at the backstory of how Duck Hunt came to be, but what about the actual game itself? Is Duck Hunt worth the legendary status that it has among gamers who grew up with it in the 80s? Duck Hunt, on the surface, is a very basic light gun shooter. The idea of the game is to shoot enough ducks on each stage so that you can progress to the next one. The charm of the game comes from the iconic Duck Hunt dog, who will laugh at you when you miss, something that many gamers have fun with today, with people saying that they always wished they could shoot the dog when he laughed at them. Duck Hunt has a ton of personality, not just because of the dog, but the ducks as well have a charming cartoon look to them too, especially when you blast them and they fall. It may not win any awards for pushing the NES to its limit, but this is an instantly recognizable game and one that will make most people smile when they see it, or perhaps filled with rage if they have some major PTSD over Duck Hunt dog laughing at them when they were kids. The NES Zapper is far more accurate than people give it credit for, and the game is actually a lot of fun to play. One way that it is different from the Japanese version is that the player can actually use the gun to select the different game modes. You do this by pointing the zapper away from the TV screen to move to the different game modes, and then shooting at the screen when you are on the mode you want. Duck Hunt offers you 3 ways to play. Game A has 1 duck at a time that will fly out and you have to shoot it. Shooting the required number of ducks will get you to the next stage. The game has a classic kill screen once you reach the 99th stage, as after this you need to reset and start again. If you fail to shoot the required number of ducks, it is game over and you have to start again. A neat twist with Game A is that a second player can pick up a controller and actually have some control over the ducks. This was something that many players knew was a thing when they had the NES back in the 80s, and it was a mind-blower for those who figured it out by accident. Game B is the harder mode, as this mode will have 2 ducks at a time for you to shoot. In the later stages with the faster, more erratic moving ducks, Game B will test the sharpest of shooters and can take you from feeling like Dirty Harry in the opening stages to a stormtrooper in the later ones. You have 3 shots on each round, and you need to make these shots count. There is a real addictive quality to Duck Hunt, and while eventually it does lose its appeal and you will shut it off, Duck Hunt is one of those games that players will go back to time and time again, even if it is just for 10 minutes here and there. In addition to the main event of shooting ducks, Duck Hunt also has a Game C for you to select, and this one is a clay pigeon shooting game where you shoot clay pigeons. To be honest, this has none of the charm that Game A and Game B have. However, when you consider Nintendo's history with electronic clay pigeon shooting in arcades in the 1970s, it is a pretty cool nod to that. We would love to hear all about your most fun stories with Duck Hunt. Did you ever make it all the way to the end? Did you throw your zapper through the TV when the Duck Hunt dog laughed at you just one time too many? Whatever your story is, we would love to hear all about it. Also, if you are enjoying the video so far, give that like button a hit with your NES Zapper. We would greatly appreciate it. There were many stories and fun things about NES games back in the day, from the Minus World in Super Mario Bros. To people finding out that Samus was actually a girl. There were all kinds of fun things during the NES days that gamers would tell each other about at school and around the water cooler at work. However, one of the most famous urban legends about the NES is that if you point the NES Light Zapper at a light bulb while playing Duck Hunt, it will register a hit every time. That is not the case at all. The NES Zapper was actually cleverly designed to prevent this exact thing, and any hits that you get when pointing the zapper at a light bulb are either a lucky coincidence or there is some kind of issue with your zapper. Despite this being proven time and time again, there are still some gamers who will swear that back in the 80s the light bulb trick worked. Perhaps it was the Duck Hunt dog who spread this rumor just so he could laugh at us even more. The NES Zapper was designed to work with the big and bulky CRT TVs that we had in the 80s and 90s. As we said earlier, for what was not exactly cutting-edge technology, Nintendo was able to make it far more accurate than many people give it credit for. However, due to the way that light guns were made, it makes playing them on a modern TV very difficult and, for the average person, impossible. There is a major lag on TVs, and without getting into all the technical mumbo-jumbo, the TV is always playing catch-up, so the input from the light gun to the TV to the game is massively out of sync, making it practically impossible to play. The most common version of Duck Hunt that you will come across is the dual cartridge of Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. To say that this is one of the most common NES games is a massive understatement, and as of making this video in April of 2026, you can still find a copy of Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt for anywhere from $5 to $10, perhaps even less. Nintendo never included an actual box with this version, so to have it complete you would need the Nintendo-branded dust sleeve and the dual instruction booklet that came with this version of the game. As of making this video, Price Charting has a complete version of the Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt listed at $46. With the NES Action Set being the most common of all the NES bundles, for those who want to add the actual console box, which does have the Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt cartridge on it, to their collection, Price Charting has this listed at $85 for the box only, and $284 if you want it fully complete. As we discussed earlier, there was also the NES Power Set, which contained world-class track meet on a triple game cartridge, along with Duck Hunt and Super Mario Bros. While not as common, interestingly, Price Charting has this listed at $5 for a loose copy of the game. If you want it complete with the dust cover and the instruction booklet, which features all 3 games, that will set you back $23. It is very interesting that this is lower than the dual cartridge. If you wanted to add the entire NES power set to your collection, which does include that triple cartridge on the front of the box, price charting has the box only listed at $55 as of writing, and a complete version listed at $300. Now, what about if you want the original? The NES Deluxe set. Sure, Rob the Robot may be the focus on the box, but it does still show that Super Mario Bros. Duck Hunt cartridge. The box alone, as of April 2026, is listed at $149. But if you want this complete, it shoots up to $800. To be honest, that has nothing to do with Duck Hunt, more so getting a complete Rob the Robot and all his accessories. You thought we were done? Duck Hunt would also see its own individual release as part of the Nintendo Black Label series, which made up the initial games that were released for the NES. You may be wondering who would need this if the actual NES came with Duck Hunt. However, Nintendo did release a cheaper set that came with just Super Mario Bros. For this reason, they released the NES Zapper along with an individual release of Duck Hunt. The Duck Hunt only cartridge is currently listed on price charting for $11 for a loose copy, making it the most expensive way to add Duck Hunt to your game collection. If you want a complete in-box version, the game shoots up as the price of this is $100, but if you want a box-only copy, you are looking at around $60. As of making this video, a brand new in-box copy of the Black Label Duck Hunt was sold for $2,500. If you could add only one version of Duck Hunt to your collection, what would it be? Would you want the most expensive and collectible version in your collection, or would you want the more iconic 2-pack? Or perhaps, would you be happiest with the one that you grew up with? Despite Duck Hunt being a game that many people are familiar with, Nintendo has only officially re-released Duck Hunt on one occasion. For Christmas of 2014, Nintendo would make Duck Hunt available for the first time since the days of the NES. This was released for the Nintendo Wii U, and technically it was released in time to be considered for the 30th anniversary of the Famicom version of Duck Hunt. This version of the game has you using a Wii remote to point at the screen and shoot at ducks. You can have the crosshair on or off. When on, the game is very easy, but with it off, it is just as challenging as the classic NES version. Seeing the ducks and, of course, Duck Hunt Dog in their pixel glory on an HD screen was something many people got a kick out of. One way to make Duck Hunt on the Wii U even more fun is by using one of the many different Wii Remote attachments that were made. Nintendo did make an official Nintendo Wii Zapper, but that is way too elaborate for Duck Hunt. If you want a more NES kind of experience, you'd be better getting one of the more revolver gun-like third-party offerings. As of writing, Nintendo has yet to make Duck Hunt available for their Nintendo Switch online service. However, we feel that with the Joy-Cons being able to be used as pointers and the Nintendo Switch 2 offering mouse controls, a Nintendo Switch port of Duck Hunt is long overdue. The crazy thing about Duck Hunt is that what we have here is a one-and-done game, a game that only got one official re-release from Nintendo themselves. A neat bit of video game trivia is that in 1990, Nintendo released Barker Bill's Trick Shooting for the NES. This is a carnival-style game that uses the NES Zapper, and one of the games actually features the Duck Hunt dog, and you can shoot him. Despite only being one game and the not super all that well-known cameo in Barker Bill's Trick Shooting, Duck Hunt is a game that is truly memorable and beloved by gamers today. Duck Hunt Dog would regularly appear on videos and articles about annoying video game characters of the 80s due to his smug laughter that put many gamers over the edge. There have been numerous fan games based on Duck Hunt, including a Game Boy version, and even a horror game based on the Duck Hunt dog stalking you. These days, you can get more Duck Hunt merch than ever before. There are various t-shirts, posters, and collectibles, but the most famous piece of merch has to be the Duck Hunt Dog amiibo, which was released for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. To say that Duck Hunt Dog being a playable character in the game blew people's minds was an understatement. He had already appeared as a trophy in Super Smash Bros. Melee, but now we could actually play as him, and, perhaps most importantly of all, we could take out all of our frustrations on him. The actual amiibo looks fantastic, easily one of the most eye-catching from the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate amiibo series. This is actually a pretty affordable amiibo that can go for as little as $7 for a loose one and $13 for a new in-box one. Duck Hunt would also make the jump to the silver screen. Sure, there is not, as of the making of this video, an actual Duck Hunt movie, but Duck Hunt Dog was featured as a trophy in the Adam Sandler 2015 movie Pixels. There are also more than a few references to Duck Hunt in the fantastic Super Mario Bros. Movie from Illumination as well. With the way that Hollywood is snapping up all the video game rights that they can right now, it would not be all that surprising to see someone think that there was money to be made from making some kind of Duck Hunt movie. So there you have it, the story of Duck Hunt, one of the most iconic games for the Nintendo Entertainment System, one of the games that most people who grew up with an NES are familiar with. We want to thank you very much for joining us today as we looked back at the fascinating history of how this came to be and how it has remained something that many gamers still have fond memories of. Let us know where you would rank Duck Hunt when it comes to the most iconic NES games of all time in the comments section below. Thanks again, and please check out our other videos to see more fun content about some of the biggest and most iconic video games of all time. We have some awesome games to talk about in future videos, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you do not miss out.